Growth Pod is brought to you by Genero, a leading growth agency in the Nordics. We interview marketing experts, business leaders, and entrepreneurs to uncover the stories and strategies behind profitable growth.
Welcome to the show, Fredrik.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
What I'm really excited to talk to you about is both the kind of the entrepreneurial business development growth side of things, the work that you've done at Miltton as a during your, I think, 15 plus years at the company.
Even
and then
more than that.
Even more, and then the specific work that you're doing, which is about communications and what you just mentioned off-air, stakeholder economy, and like making sure that identifying, I guess, key stakeholders and then managing the communication towards those, which is, I think, just really fascinating and something that I guess a lot of companies need help with, which is one of the reasons why you're growing. But let's start with Miltton. So you did a stint at the company, then you came back, I think, in 2008?
Yeah, correct. I joined in 2004 when Miltton was like 2.5 years old. We were 4 people and 1 dog, tucked away in a remote office somewhere in Helsinki with only 1 window. Remember that. We only had 1 window. And yeah, that was in 2004. I spent 2 years, and then I got one of those phone calls you can't say no to. So I was recruited to become the communications director for Nissan in Northern Europe. Being a young guy, 31 or something like that, I felt that I just need to try this out. And it was a fun ride. Lasted a little over 2 years. But all along I had this sense of belonging at Miltton. Plus, Matthias, the founder, kept on calling me once a week, so I couldn't bear that anymore. So I said, yeah, I'll go back, and I have really not regretted it since. It's been a wonderful ride.
So you've gone from 4 to 400 people. So it's 100x growth in headcount.
Yeah, true.
I guess that's like the company goes through so many different stages of growth. The organization changes, I guess, multiple times. So, like, can you walk through like what's that journey been like, both in terms of like maybe starting with some of the challenges that have come with.
Yeah, well, in order to analyze that properly, I think we need to chop it into pieces, into different phases. And the first one, of course, being getting a solid foundation on which to build. And that really entails good people and good clients and a pitch that nobody else has. Our advantage was probably in the early days that we wanted to challenge the PR and comms industry in Finland. And we took example from Sweden, which was really essentially the superpower of comms and marketing at that time, and partly still is. And then we were really lucky to have a few well-established, highly respected brands as our clients early on, and all of them actually still are clients. So that was really that's really the first phase, getting the ground built properly. Then, as an advisory, you need to make sure that you're constantly relevant and that your mandate grows. So you need to develop your offering in accordance with what's happening in the world. And I think that can be challenging for some agencies where you are really kind of niched, and what might happen then is that niche no longer is relevant. So that's why we've constantly added new disciplines and new competence areas to what we do, and identifying those is not always easy. It's some have succeeded tremendously well, and others have failed. And you just need to manage that portfolio in a good way. And then you come into a size when you're a bit bigger. You need to manage the business in a slightly different way. You need to have processes in place. It's no longer that constructive chaos. You need to move from that into a more organized way of working. And that, of course, then entails a few sets of challenges. One of which is to remain hungry, to keep up that challenger attitude, and to make sure that you don't forget where you come from, the strengths you have. So I would maybe kind of divide the growth journey in phases, and they all entail different kinds of challenges. But then again, challenges are fun.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Lots to unpack, but I would start with something that I feel like I always, or very often ask. You mentioned Sweden being the superpower in comms.
Yeah.
Why do you think they're so good at it? And yeah.
That's, I've been pondering this a lot and discussing with lots of Swedes. I think one of the things is that Sweden has been exposed to foreign trade for much longer than we have. I mean, 400 or 500 years since the Ostindiska Company and all of that. Yeah. So they've been international by nature for way longer than we have. The second thing is probably that their home market is big enough to grow in size, so that you have the resources to internationalize, and by doing so. You also need to. There's a step change in comms and marketing that needs to happen, and they've been good at it. And then, of course, I mean, why is Iceland good at football? Because they have the culture. It's not a big country, and there's no genetic prerequisite for making them good at football or handball. They just have the culture, as they do in Sweden when it comes to marketing. It's been a long culture of successful comms and marketing, and that then feeds new success.
Right.
So maybe a fluffy answer, but I think there are many components to it.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. So was that a challenge then early on, because you were starting in Finland? You wanted to change the way that PR and comms was done in Finland, and I'm guessing it was a lot less. It was much more rigid. Maybe companies didn't value it as much as they were in Sweden. Like, was that a big challenge early on, as a new couple of person team trying to take on kind of like the industry?
Well, I would say that there was a market, and there was a demand, and I think that to some extent that demand was underserved. But there's also the element of creating new demand, really packaging your thinking into something that the client can buy. And the fact is that many of Finnish brands and companies, whilst they might be industry leaders within their own specific niche, on a global scale they're still quite small. Yeah. And therefore there's a need for thinking anew, having creative approaches to how you market or how you communicate, and I guess at that time when we started talking about these things, they were fairly novel, and there was a demand for it, so it was a combination of offering something new and a market that was probably slightly underserved.
Right. Yeah. You mentioned one of the key thing, like an agency, is increasing your mandate, and also now you mentioned creating new demand. I guess like thought leadership is something that kind of encompasses both of those. How did you go about creating that kind of authority to be able to create new demand and to be able to tell these industry-leading companies that, hey, this is why we actually have the insights and the competency to be able to give you really good advice?
Well, I think that comes down to maybe the most fundamental element of what we are. And our strategy has been simple. It's to recruit the best people from all silos of society. And if you approach a problem with only one specific competence, the solutions are fairly limited. But if you surround that with a very broad array of competences, people with backgrounds in media or politics or design or sustainability or capital markets, and add all of those elements in your analysis, then suddenly it becomes much more substantial, much more interesting, and we would argue that the quality is higher, both in how you analyze the problem, but also how you solve it. So I think the combination of those competences around the same table and underneath one roof is really what sets us apart. Got it.
So, when it comes to people, the obvious question is, how do you identify top talent? How do you recruit them? How do you retain them? Any kind of specific tools, strategies, frameworks, processes?
Well, I think good talent attracts good talent. So we've done a fair amount of fairly visible recruitments during the years, and well-known people coming from different areas of society into our.
For instance,
onto our
Maria Wetterstrand.
Yeah, Wetterstrand, a brilliant colleague of ours. She used to be the chair of the Swedish Greens, for instance, brilliant consultant and a brilliant person as well. So I think good talent attract good talent, and once you're within our organization and you get inspired by all of these people every day, you quite soon realize that this is a privilege. To be able to work with such broad talent and great talent. And that's probably one of the reasons why we also then retain many of them for a long time. People tend to stay with us for quite a long time. And actually, what also happens quite often is that people return. I was the first one back in 2000 and whatever it was. But without having done the maths, I would say that maybe 10% of our staff in Helsinki have returned from elsewhere. They've gone somewhere, tested it out, and come back. Okay.
I think as an employer, that's like probably the best kind of.
Yeah, we're of course happy for every single one who gets an interesting position somewhere, but we're also very happy when they come back.
Yeah, it's a huge vote of confidence. Yeah. Okay, and you mentioned so kind of creating that atmosphere of having really talented, smart people working really hard, that attracts more people who want to join that. Yeah. And I'm guessing there's what's the overall vision then, or what role does that play in the pitch to attracting talent, the overall direction of the company?
Well, I think, of course, it's very important, and of course also the values and the culture of the company. Miltton might seem, you mentioned before we went on air, our office, and it's a big clunky thing, almost intimidating. But once you enter, almost everyone says that there's a warm feeling. And our main value is kindness, which might be surprising for a big consulting company. We treat each other with respect, and we're kind to each other, and we support each other all the time, whatever might happen. So I think that's one of the things that people sense when they get in the process of discussing with us whether or not they would work for us. So I think that's one element to it. But then we call ourselves change makers. We want to, with the tools that we have, which is profound societal insight and now I'm exaggerating, but really good handicraft in comms and all marketing and everything it entails. We want to change the world for the better. And I know this sounds a bit tacky, but we've done things we've had projects that really accomplish that. And I think people sense that. It's not always like that. There's an everyday grind, like in every organization, but that's what we want to do, and I think many of us share that ambition.
Got it. It seems often it seems like almost all companies struggle with internal communication at some level, and you are communication experts. Yeah. So I'm just curious to hear kind of how you've structured that or have you thought about communications as you kind of designed the organization? And maybe there's specific examples. I remember, I think it was Pixar, that there's a famous example of Steve Jobs designing the building so that people would be forced to walk, and that would create these encounters that would spark these kind of creative insights. What kind of principles have you used in designing the organization from a comms point of view?
Well, first of all, we're a very flat organization. Everybody talks to everyone, or at least has the opportunity to do so. So I think that's one thing. But all that, having said that, and an initial disclaimer, even though we're professionals on it, is very hard, like in all organizations. So that goes without saying. I think one element of it is remembering that communications, least of all internal communication, it's not a transaction, it's a relationship. It's an ongoing process in which there's a culture that allows people to ask, and say and think and have an opinion. I think that's number one, and that's a cultural thing. That's not a structural thing. That's a cultural thing. So that's the foundation, I believe, for it. And the second one is that you need to, in this day and age, you need to be transparent. You need to tell. You need to have a dialogue with your people about how we're doing, what are we doing, what is it that we want to accomplish, and that sounds like a no-brainer, but it might sometimes be fairly hard to accomplish, actually, to have that. But we're trying. Everything can always be done better, but we're trying in that. And then maybe the third element is that we regard Miltton maybe not as much as a company, but more as a ecosystem or platform, which brings together people from different silos of society. Some might be clients, some might be former colleagues, some might be opinion leaders, some might be staff, etc. And in the idea of an ecosystem where people meet and create things together, there's always that built-in idea of a dialogue in which you share ideas and share concerns and share values and all of that. So I think that's also an important element in how we function as an organization.
I think the dialogue aspect is really interesting because it's clear that when you have open dialogue and you can have a very constructive debate, that will surface best ideas and different perspectives, and you get this. It should lead to the best possible outcome. Yeah. And then I think in practice it's so difficult because people are. I mean, we're all fragile at some point, and it's very hard to get people to speak their minds about things, and certain things become, holy cows inside an organization they can't really criticize, and there's all these like personal and organizational barriers that keep us from doing that. So like just anything that you've been able to observe, and any kind of any tips, I guess, is what I'm asking for how to create that organization where people are actually you're actually getting people to speak their minds throughout the 400 plus organization.
Again, I go back to the culture of the organization and making sure that there's room for everybody, regardless of what their position is or what their task or role is. Making sure that they're heard, and making sure that there's that both appetite but also the encouragement to contribute and have your saying and criticize and everything that entails. I don't think there's one rule or two tips or one silver bullet on how to solve it. I think it's a long journey, and you just need to create that culture in which you can everybody has room to contribute.
Yeah. So it's like that kind of. I think someone described culture as like like a 50-day moving average of the company. So it changes all the time. It's just the sum of like all the interactions in the company. So I guess that to your point, like there's no easy fix. There's no magic tool. It's not about implementing Slack versus something else. Yeah,
well, of course we have the Slacks and everything. It's not the tools are there, but I think the tools are also subject to culture.
Yeah.
And I just I have to stress that we're in no way perfect in this. Every organization has their weaknesses and strengths, and we need to be better at it as well, even though that is our handicraft.
Yeah, I think that's encouraging for everyone who feels like they're so bad at this, which I guess is a lot of people. Let's talk a little bit about comms in general. You've seen, you've been in this industry for a long time now. Has anything changed? Or a lot of things have changed, rise of social media and so forth. But do you feel that we're in a place right now where there's like there's a clear playbook that companies can use, or are we in this state of like there's a constant change and we're like things are changing so fast that there's no specific playbook? We're just companies are constantly having to react to changes in how people.
I'm not. Playbook is probably the wrong word, but I think a realization needs to happen, and that is that we've kind of entered this time of let's call it a stakeholder economy, which means that there is no transaction or investment or process that is not subject to increasing stakeholder interest and pressures. In other words, in order for a company to be successful, it really needs to profoundly understand all the stakeholders that surround it. And it needs to manage those. And it needs to make sure that those stakeholders, or the majority of them, are in support of the commercial journey that company or organization is having. If you fail in creating the stakeholder support, then you might actually fail in your commercial or your strategic interests. So really understand it that I'll describe it another way. Our industry has spent 20 or almost 30 years in defining customer journeys, right? And millions and billions have gone into understanding them and creating the infrastructures and the technologies to do that. I think the same level of sophistication should be applied to all stakeholders that are critical to a company. Just making sure that you really profoundly understand what they think and how you as a company should act as part of society. We have this saying that you don't position your brand or company against competition. You position it as part of society. And that is getting increasingly true. So this realization is, I think, the most important one to make right now, if you're in comms. And then, of course, it's or in general management. But then, of course, there are lots of things happening. The sustainability, involvement, AI, increasing a number of global and geopolitical trends and events that shape our operating environment. You just need to understand how these affect your organization and your comms. And that's not easy because, as you said, it's so fast and resources are usually quite slim. So in order for the company to understand what happens within these, you usually need to adapt quite quickly.
Yeah, lots in there. But one thing that I feel, at least from a consumer, user, individual person point of view, it's really difficult to get a sense of what's really going on. It feels like, let's say in Finland 50 years ago, we had like 4 TV channels, there's local newspapers, and they tell the narrative. Like this is what the general public thinks. Now, depending on who you follow on Twitter or depending on which group you're active in on Facebook, you get completely different framings of the world. So how are you going about surfacing those kind of insights to allow customers, companies, to be able to actually get a pulse on what's going on?
Well, I think there are 2 answers to that question. And the first answer I actually already touched upon, and the fact that you are surrounding a problem or a project with very different competences. So someone with background in media might analyze the situation very differently from someone with background in politics or sustainability. And then the debate and the dialogue and the accumulated knowledge of the team then, at least to some extent, shows the entire picture or a resemblance of the entire picture. But then there's also, we're working very extensively with insights on different levels. We have a subsidiary called Nordic West Office, which is fairly well known here in Finland, working with geopolitics and global events and global trends. Then we, of course, have our EU advisory in Brussels, looking at everything that happens in EU, because it's profoundly important for our clients and our businesses. Then we have our local public affairs teams, knowing what's happening in national decision making and everything that entails. And then we have a research team with anthropologists and other qualitative and quantitative insights that look into what is happening in society, what are consumers looking at, what are different stakeholders looking at. So that those levels of insight allow us to, I would say, understand fairly well what's happening in society, and then convey that to our clients and the projects we work with. But by no means, it's probably not comprehensive, but it's fairly good at least.
So would it be safe to say that's kind of like always a starting point when you're engaging a new potential client, is providing them with this broad qualitative backed perspective on what's going on that they may completely lack
Well, not always, but oftentimes, yes.
Yeah. Okay. One thing that I'd be kind of, well, first let's ask this. Some people have said that we're kind of in this post-truth era. Maybe we've been in those kinds of eras in the past. Maybe we've always been there, but certainly it feels like much more tangible.
Yeah.
So, like, how are you telling, advising clients when we're in a stage where it seems like trust in all institutions, media, is like just keeps eroding.
Yeah.
Like, how is that impacting how companies should do communication?
Well, I think it needs to be dismantled into pieces in order to give a proper answer to it. But I think number one is, of course, something that applies to us all as individuals and professionals is to understand and critically analyze things that we encounter. That goes without saying, and it's a huge task because, as you said, the trend is not going the right way. But without that ability, we lack certainly the capability to analyze things properly. But if you talk what you referred to, I think that looks very different, or could look fairly different if you look at it from a societal and political point of view, or an organizational and commercial point of view. Yeah. It's really a big problem in society and in politics and decision making in that area. But then if you look at companies, they're of course guided by rules, regulations, and laws, and to some extent at least, whilst we need to be better at understanding what's going on in the world and what is right and what's not and what's true and what's not, those laws, regulations, and rules, to some extent at least, make it easier for companies to operate in this environment. So, but yes, it's a big challenge, of course.
Yeah, I'm thinking. I mean, it feels like so many things have changed now. From just thinking back, like maybe 10 years ago. Now you have employees of companies who are active on different. I mean, it could be anything from like going on employee review sites like Glassdoor to being very active on LinkedIn, and having potentially far greater reach than the company itself. And I recently saw on LinkedIn there was a guy who was dismissed, or he quit from Amazon, and he had this posted letter that he had shared, and that got tons of traction. So it feels like a lot of the power, shall we say, has moved, or certainly been more distributed equally between individuals and companies. So how are you advising clients to think about employee ambassadorship, for instance, or how do you bring in that kind of, like, how do you now that employees have these tools have given individuals a much greater voice, how should companies think about using that kind of symbiotic relationship?
I think to some extent at least this goes under the umbrella of thought leadership and communicative leadership. And if we start from let's say the management level, I believe that it's increasingly important for the top levels of the company to be good communicators, to really understand their audience and to be able to resonate with that, to be good storytellers, so that they get that stakeholder support that I mentioned a few minutes back. And that's not only, we see in some companies you have the CEO being really good at that, but that's not enough. The CEO is of course the prime voice of the company, but then you need to get the rest of the crew on board as well to become good storytellers, not only in external relations but also internally. It's really important that you have people that are able to convey the company direction and the company purpose and the value add in a meaningful way. So I think that's something that you really need to put some careful attention to in all organizations. But then, coming closer to your question, I think we live in an age where everybody has a voice, and everybody who's opinionated can raise that voice. So we've kind of gone past the time maybe when that's a major concern. It's become an everyday thing. The question is really, how do you motivate people to use that traction into something meaningful?
Yeah.
And that's where the attention should go.
Yeah, and I feel like a key part there is the authenticity and authenticity that comes from hearing individuals, because at least as a consumer, I feel like I've gotten used to when I'm hearing from companies, I'm used to it being very polished and obviously very curated, and that for me makes it really boring typically. So how do companies manage this tension between, on one hand, wanting to control the narrative and the messaging, and I mean, there's all these memes about big companies that you can't get anything past legal, and then on the other side, authenticity, like real human, like vulnerability and authenticity is so engaging to people. And just to give one example, like you have Elon Musk, who I feel like has taken kind of sledgehammer to all like traditional comms rules, and you know, but it resonates clearly. Like millions and millions of people follow him. And so I guess what I'm asking is, like, is he an anomaly, Elon Musk? I mean, in many ways he is. Or do you think we're seeing this emergence of companies and leaders recognizing that, oh, if I'm really authentic and, you know, I say what I think and I kind of communicate off the cuff, sometimes, you know, it's not gonna land too well, but it's gonna give me this authenticity that will allow me to rise above the noise of all these other companies with their polished messaging. Like, what do you think about that?
I think overall authenticity is, of course, a prerequisite for good comms. That goes without saying. But I think that the main topic that one needs to understand is what is truly relevant and meaningful and what is not. Companies and brands have a tendency to talk quite a lot about themselves and the things that are interesting for themselves, from a commercial or innovation perspective. Those things aren't necessarily very interesting for a broader societal context. So the communicative sweet spot is the place where the company's interests and strengths meet with societal questions or big trends. And identifying that sweet spot is what you really should do. And then, of course, yes, have your own tonality, have your own way of doing it, have your style, and yes, making sure that it's authentic. That's when it works best. I don't know about Elon Musk. With all due respect, maybe he's the exception to the rule. He plays by his own rules.
Yeah, it's like when you see all these people like kind of reading about Steve Jobs and wanting to copy him, and it's like, well, you're not Steve Jobs, you know. Okay, so interesting. So with that sweet spot, then how would you advise, let's say, a industrial manufacturing company that's, you know, we're really good at this. We make this whatever widget, and we're really good at it, but you know, we just make this widget and we serve our customers really well, and that's great. But like, we don't have any idea about the broader, like, how do we even put this in context of the broader societal picture? Like, how do you advise typically companies go? But I guess what I'm asking is, like, do you need this grand vision, or is it just enough to kind of say, we do this really well and it's serving our customers and we're providing jobs?
There's this saying, don't make ads, make conversation starters. And I think that's a good rule. Really having a process by which you identify a few things. Number one, what are the sleeping beauties within the organization? The things that are so close to you that you don't see that they're interesting. And there are lots in every organization. So I think that's one thing. The second thing is through a process, really understanding, and I come back to stakeholder relations and the stakeholder economy, what the things we do, how are they relevant in a broader context? And that's something, it's not advice, it's a process where you just go on and try to identify the different things that somehow you add to the conversation. Somehow you take the debate into a next phase, or you add something new to something that already exists. And usually you find them, but it's hard work sometimes.
Yeah. I think a great point with the Sleeping Beauty. I guess that's where like an external consultant can really help.
Yeah, surely. There's we've had so many projects where the company or the client, It's like there's nothing to see here, nothing to say here, and then we start scratching the surface, and it's just there's a vast amount of interesting stories about innovation or people or processes or history or aspirations that can be then converted into interesting stuff.
So safe to say that more often than not, it's not about creating some new grand vision or strategy. It's actually about uncovering what's already there and making it interesting.
Yeah, it's about. I think it's both. You really need to some extent have an aspiration. This is what we want to accomplish. This is the world we want to create. This is the value you want to add to our customers. This is where we want to reach. And then building that story with tangible evidence, and those are usually the stories and the sleeping beauties that you can identify in the process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we have to wrap up really soon here, but one final question for you. I think you've done a great job at touching upon a lot of things that kind of set the stage for successful comms, identifying stakeholders, starting with that obviously, and finding the sweet spot. Once you've done that, kind of laid that foundation as a company, any advice or thoughts about then the channel, the mechanism that you use to get that message across to people? And I'm thinking specifically in this day and age where we're all like flooded with ads, with social media posts, with news, with videos. Like there's way too much. So how do you go about like just standing out, just getting attention, getting anyone to pay attention to what you have to say?
Well, again, I come back to understanding what is interesting and what is not. And you do that by understanding how society works and how the societal stakeholders are, what drives them and what does not. Then you need to have an idea that we used to say maybe some time back, but still probably is relevant, is channel independent. An idea that is strong enough, regardless if you're using this or that channel, that is just so strong that it actually creates traction and generates interest. And that you should never plan a campaign, or rarely plan a campaign based on channels or tools or something like that. You should always think, how is this relevant? How is this adding to something in an interesting way?
That reminds me of like Ogilvy's concept of the big idea. Like every campaign needs to have that big idea, and if you can't identify that, then you need to do more work in understanding. Yeah.
And simplify.
Yeah.
Making it super easy to grasp.
Yeah. I lied. I have to ask one more question because the topic communication is so interesting to me. Any book, any resource that has helped, or really, shall we say, profoundly shaped how you view communication?
No, I must. My source of inspiration is the everyday encounter with my colleagues and my clients. To be honest, there's so many books and so much literature and so many thinkers and doers or speakers that it's hard to identify one single. I think the magic happens in the everyday interaction with clients and colleagues.
Yeah, I respect that answer. Fredrik, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
If people want to follow you, is LinkedIn the place where you're most active?
That too. I'm ashamed to say that I'm fairly passive, so I would encourage to follow Miltton as a whole.
We'll put that link in the show notes.
Yeah.
Like I said, thank you so much, and
thank you.
Best of luck with everything you got going on.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening. You can find all episodes of The Growth Pod on Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts.